She was a pretty young lady, and she had confidence. She got a lot of attention.
They say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
I used to tell her all the time, like, you too pretty, like, be careful who's around you because people want to steal your light.
But what happens when the wrong person gets a look?
This is a situation where someone who has consistently been hurt in the past, and along with their insecurities, it's a cocktail for a bad situation.
Self-doubt begins to grow.
She wanted to be her, in a sense. So it does develop to some sort of hatred.
She was jealous of me.
And explodes in a murderous fixation.
It seems that if she had gotten away with murder one time, maybe she thought she could get away with it again.
My name is DeQuandalyn Adams, and I am LuQuandalyn's mother. Lou caught the attention of a lot of people around her because of how she carried herself. She was so friendly. She was pretty.
She never raised any flags, never said I'm having issues with somebody, nothing. Like, she didn't mention it.
Before that, she never mentioned anything was going on. No red flags, no beef with anybody, because she know I'm her mom, and I was just gonna say, well, you need to come on home. It's like, what happened? You know, what really happened for this to end like this?
LuQuandalyn Hargrove, known to friends and family as Lou or Nunu, was born in 1997 in Minden, Louisiana, and raised by her mother, DeQuandalyn.
It wasn't hard raising her as a single mom because I had my dad and all the women in the family. Everybody helped out when it came to raising Lou, whatever I needed.
As a little girl, she was just so sweet, and she was loving, and she was very smart.
She liked to dance. She liked to talk, and she liked to sing.
And we went to church all the time. So that played a very important role in her life. Even though she was the only child, she wasn't raised like the only child. She was raised with her cousin as a sister.
I was the quiet one, the shy one, and she was so outgoing and outspoken and vibrant. She was the life of the room. She was so headstrong to be so young. So whatever she wanted to do, she's going to persevere to do it.
Lou was fine with being the center of attention. She loved it. I loved it for her. She was a pretty girl.
Lou is also smart and graduates high school a semester early in 2015.
After she graduated, she ended up moving to Shreveport with her cousin, and she kind of just went from there.
She was just happy to be done with school, but eventually she did say she wanted to be a nurse, probably because I'm a nurse. And I felt like she just wanted to kind of follow in my footsteps.
By 2016, Lou is working and saving up to one day attend nursing school.
She was just focusing pretty much on going to work and getting her own place. She just wanted to be happy, you know.
She told me she had met this guy, and the next thing I knew, she was pregnant.
She called me. I'll never forget the phone call. She called me and she said, "Girl, I just seen 2 lines on the pregnancy test."
She was very happy and ready to become a mom.
What is it? Put it over here, right here in front of my phone.
In 2017, Lou gives birth to a beautiful baby girl. Unfortunately, her relationship with the child's father doesn't last.
The relationship between Lou's baby daddy and her, I don't think they had any issues because he, of course he wanted to be a part of her life, and he was.
At that point, she knew what she was doing, so, she seemed happy.
I used to tell her all the time, like, you too pretty, like, be careful who's around you because people want to steal your light.
It's 12:35 p.m., and employees at a small office building are in the middle of their lunch hour when they hear a loud crash outside.
It's a normal work day for them. And so I imagine when you hear this loud crash, you're confused and you're trying to see what this is. And as they go to investigate, they see this big SUV in the front office.
There were multiple people inside the car, an adult male, it looked to be a small child, and a woman who was driving the SUV.
The driver of the vehicle does make an attempt she tries to back the vehicle up, but it appears that the vehicle is almost wedged into the cement of the building. And then she just grabs her baby and she leaves. She just takes off and she runs and tries to get away from this scene.
The office workers immediately dial 911.
Got a black SUV. It hit the building there. It went into the building.
And one of the employees, when she was on the phone with the operator, she looks down and she sees a foot underneath the vehicle.
The victim was pent beneath the car underneath the driver's front tire.
The vehicle essentially crushed her.
They're going to try to render life-saving measures. Unfortunately, she was hurt very critically.
The male passenger is still on the scene as first responders arrive, and he tearfully tells them the victim is his girlfriend.
So at that point, the victim was positively identified as LaQuandalyn Hargrove.
Despite first responders' desperate attempts to save her, Lou is pronounced dead at the scene.
What did they tell you when you got the call?
So I'm already at work. One of my coworkers walked straight in, handing me a phone. I don't know who it was on the other end. I never asked. She was like, they say no, dead.
My daughter gets this call. We had to come over to Shreveport to see what was going on and was it true.
When we made it to the scene, it was so much yellow tape everywhere. It was so much yellow tape.
We got out the car in a frenzy, and it was horrifying. And I just had to pray and cry for God to give us the strength.
I just fell to my knees. I fell to my knees and cried, and I asked them why. We didn't understand that.
Well, I was just shocked because, like, is this for real? What happened?
Thankfully, there were witnesses who actually, saw what happened.
Witnesses reported a woman running, and the woman who was running was subsequently struck by the SUV.
She ran to a business, and they have a front porch. And she ran up to the doorway on the front porch, I'm assuming trying to get away from whoever was in this vehicle. This vehicle turned into and drove right up on the front porch and pinned her against the building.
And there was a young female who was seen carrying a small child leaving the scene following the incident.
What did that lady look like?
A young black female, I would say in her 20s, maybe 30, kind of thin. She had on a pink, kind of red-looking tank top and shorts.
So we'll put out a description of the driver, and we're going to make every attempt to try to locate that person.
It's possible the person that struck Lou intended to hit her with the vehicle.
Shreveport police are at the scene of a fatal hit and run that claimed the life of 21-year-old LaQuandalyn Hargrove. To understand what happened, police turn to the vehicle's passenger. He identifies himself as Latorius Mitchell, and he claims to be dating the victim.
Pick him up, don't let him go, because that's our eyewitness, and he's involved in this.
He's there at the time Lou takes her last breath. So he very much is an important witness in this case.
As Latorius is taken to the police department for a formal interview, detectives arrive and begin examining the scene.
When we arrived on scene, the victim was deceased, and she was up against the brick wall. It looked like the weight of the vehicle pressing up against her was definitely a significant cause of her death. And it appeared that she was holding a purse and maybe a piece of hair. It may have been an extension or a wig, perhaps, that she was wearing prior to the incident. We also observed damage to the vehicle on the rear passenger side. The rear window was busted out. So it appeared that the vehicle had sustained some damage that wasn't consistent with it running into the building.
As police continue to search the scene, they notice security cameras pointed directly at the crash.
So they're initially getting warrants for surveillance videos.
While the victim is transferred to the morgue, detectives turn their attention to the eyewitness in custody.
Mr. Mitchell was detained and transported to our detective office to provide a statement to them regarding what he observed.
I'm Detective Clark with SPD. What's your name, man?
Latorius Mitchell.
All right, and you were the passenger, front seat passenger in the car?
Yeah.
Whose car is that?
It's her car, Shamika.
Latorius says the woman is 21-year-old Shamika Ellis.
Who was that to you?
My girlfriend.
So who is the girl that died?
I was having two girlfriends.
He divulged information that he had been intimate with both females.
Does Shamika know that?
But they had words before.
Like in person or like over social media?
Social media, text messages.
The night prior to the incident, it's our understanding that Mr. Mitchell had spent the night for a short time with LaQuandalyn, followed by an argument that they had.
He'd be at Lou's, and while at Lou's, he might be texting Shamika. So I think at some point, Lou realizes that he is going back and forth between the two women. And I think that is what caused Lou to want to distance herself from him.
Lou wanted to break up with him. Nunu was trying to get away from him, and he was trying to keep her.
So there was some type of altercation at Lou's house that led him to leaving. He was later picked up by, we believe, Shamika.
Does she know that you were over there at Lou's house? You didn't tell her that?
According to Latorius, earlier that day, Shamika was driving him to the mall when they just happened to pass Lou on the street.
She see Lou.
Lou was walking?
Yeah.
So did Shamika pull in somewhere? She got out of the car?
Yeah, and then they just started running towards each other.
And so once the two parties, the two rival parties met, then it was a very volatile situation at the time. We're talking about a fight, objects are being thrown. He actually said that he did try to stop them. And at one point, there was a break in the fight, and Lou was able to walk away, and Shamika was able to get back into the driver's seat at that point.
So once they were pulled apart, I think Lou realizes that her phone, she does not have her cell phone. So quite naturally, she's asking, give me my phone back.
Mr. Mitchell denied ever having Lou's cell phone. It could have perhaps been lost on scene.
And so Lou starts hitting the windows. What was she hitting it with?
A stick.
She picks the branch up and she hits the car with it, the window. But Shamika Ellis had one of her daughters with her. So the baby's in the back seat. Lou strikes the vehicle, and when she strikes it, it shatters the window. And unfortunately, that's where things kind of take a turn.
Now she feels like you put my child in danger. So now she's even madder. So she's flashing out at this point.
I can only presume that Lou didn't realize that a baby was in there. But once this window breaks, at this point, Shamika is probably angry. She is probably furious, and she's probably not really thinking.
Latoria says that's when Shamika went into a rage and unleashed her anger on Lou.
She said, I'm gonna mow this down.
Okay, so what does Shamika do?
I'm holding the wood. She like, move. I'm like, nah, you gonna hurt her. And then she like, nah, move. And she hit her in a little bit. And when I got out, I ain't see her. I thought Lou had moved, and she just ran into the building. So she started panicking. I'm like, oh, the truck won't go. I see Lou under the truck. So I like moved. I jumped in, I tried to reverse it, won't get off her.
Latorius claims that once Shamika realized what she had done, she had fled with her child.
Ultimately, Mr. Mitchell was not the driver of the SUV that struck Lou. We do believe that it was Shamika indeed the driver. So he was released without any charges.
And so I think once they learned that Shamika was the driver, their focus is to go ahead and figure out where she is, because she has to be close.
That afternoon, an officer canvassing the area spots Shamika.
She's not very far from the scene. And again, she has her child with her.
She was detained and transported to police headquarters.
Quite naturally, they're going to take her in for questioning.
But what Shamika is about to say next is a far cry from a confession.
I didn't kill that woman. I pressed the brakes and everything. I tried my best. The brakes are able to stop that car.
Within hours of a fatal hit and run that claimed the life of 21-year-old LaQuandalyn Hargrove, police have arrested the driver, 21-year-old Shamika Ellis.
Before we start anything, the girl that was hit, what happened to her? Man, please don't tell me someone passed away.
Yes, she did.
Oh my God. And I'm the fault for them.
So look.
Oh no, I got kids.
When she learns that Lou was dead, I remember her getting upset, but I don't know that she got upset as much because Lou didn't make it, or because she knew that there were going to be, consequences for her actions.
Oh my God.
Born in 1998, Shamika Dozetta Ellis spent her whole life in Shreveport, Louisiana.
We don't know a lot about her childhood and how she was raised and how she grew up. But what happened to LaQuandalyn would lead us to think that there was something very vital missing in how she was taught to deal with anger and how she was taught to deal with conflict.
At 16, she began dating 17-year-old Kenyon Williams. 2 years later, she discovered she was pregnant with Kenyon's baby and dropped out of high school in the 10th grade. That year, they had their first daughter, and a year later, they were expecting their second child.
It would appear that Shamika was a very highly emotionally charged person, and she believed strongly in relationships. But her relationship appeared to be going through some troubles.
Shamika found out she was pregnant again, but her relationship with Kenyon, it would not last.
By 2019, Shamika was newly single and raising 3 daughters on her own.
Then she met Latorius Mitchell, and they began a relationship. But the relationship, it wasn't what Shamika had hoped for.
So, we were messing with both of us, I guess. I don't know.
Shamika had taken up just scrolling through Facebook, and she couldn't stand seeing Lou living her best life and talking about a relationship with the guy that she so desperately wanted to be with.
Like, me and her had got into it a couple times over Facebook. But she's always inboxing me and stuff. It was nothing like personal. I mean, she had a problem with me, but it was nothing like personal, nothing like that.
When Shamika spotted her romantic rival on the street, she claims Lou was the one who immediately became aggressive.
I stopped. She seen me and she started talking, yelling at the car and stuff. So I stopped. I was like, "What, Lou?" And she was like, she wanted to fight, you know?
So at this point, Shamika, who's driving the SUV, stops the SUV, gets out, and they have a mutual fight. And it was revealed during the fight that the previous night that Mr. Mitchell had spent the night with LaQuandalyn. So that enrages her. That puts her on a pathway of rage.
To drive off, I went down. Like, I don't know, she was still out there looking for her phone. I don't know. But, you know, I'm mad, so I hit it. Me and him started arguing. And I don't even know how she even get down there. Me and him started arguing. The car lost control.
She said she was engaged in an argument with Latorius, and so she did not see LaQuandalyn prior to hitting her with the SUV.
You lose control and then happen to just veer perfectly in between these two columns, and the person that you just got in a fight with that's been messing around with your boyfriend, you just happen to accidentally run over and kill her right here?
I didn't kill that woman. I pressed the brakes and everything. I tried my best. The brakes ain't even stop that car.
You want us to believe that you did not see this woman? People who typically lose control of a vehicle don't lose control and follow the path of someone that's running from them.
She may have lost control of her temper, but I don't think she lost control of the vehicle.
You're just trying to scare her?
Yes.
Well, that's different than you saying it's an accident, because there's no way that's an accident.
I'm never in jail. I'm a good person. I'm not a killer. But I did it. I hate myself. Anything about me is fake like this. I'm not looking at their mama like a murderer. I'm not a murderer.
Following the interviews with police detectives, Shamika was ultimately charged with 1 count of second-degree murder.
And as the investigation continues, new details will emerge that add a shocking twist to the case.
When people want attention and they seek it, like, people do crazy stuff in the heat of the moment.
I feel like she just couldn't control her anger once she get pushed so far.
Within hours of running over 21-year-old LaQuandalyn Hargrove in her SUV, 21-year-old Shamika Ellis is arrested for Lou's murder. Lou's family is shocked and horrified to learn of Shamika's claims.
The lead detective, he actually sat down with us and kind of gave us a little rundown on what all happened and what was going to be taking place.
And so naturally, the family is heartbroken. They're grieving at this point. They just lost LaQuandalyn tragically.
I was devastated. I was very devastated. Knowing that she had a child that was left for someone else to have to raise. I mean, every kid needs their mom.
Lou's family insists that Lou wasn't one to get mixed up in drama, and that she was just looking for a supportive partner to build a family.
She wanted somebody that wanted to be with her and help her. Would they help each other and help take care of her baby? She was on like having a family.
Looking for evidence to disprove Shamika's claims that she didn't mean to hit Lou, detectives review surveillance footage from the crime scene.
The video was able to show the crash, the impact, and unfortunately the last moments of LaQuandalyn's life. In that video, it clearly shows LaQuandalyn running in an attempt to try to get away from the vehicle. So it did appear that there was a deliberate effort on Shamika's part to run this woman over.
That same day, two of Lou's closest friends contact detectives with important information.
So how long have you been friends with Lou?
3 or 4 years.
So you were on the phone while the girl pulls up?
Yeah, all we heard was them fighting. And then kind of after a while, we heard music. So we knew that the phone was in the car, in the truck, because we heard the music and stuff in the truck. And the next thing you know, we heard like a big noise. We don't know what it was.
Lou's friends say they raced to the scene and approached witnesses that had gathered near the crashed vehicle.
Police officer was like, where's Lou? What happened? They was like, she got hit or something like that. Was like, for real? I was just telling her, I'm on my way. Don't die fight, don't do nothing. I'm on my way.
Has there been some drama that you know about? What's been going on with that?
She been fighting with that girl on Facebook for a long time. Like they've been arguing back and forth for a long time. I really do think she messed with.
Thank you.
Detectives believe they've uncovered a deadly love triangle, but an online search will uncover a much darker truth.
It seems that if she had gotten away with murder one time, maybe she thought she could get away with it again.
After the hit-and-run death of 21-year-old LaQuandalyn Hargrove, police learn more about the online feud between the victim and the driver, 21-year-old Shamika Ellis.
So the feud between the two women, we do believe, started publicly on social media.
They were both dating the same guy. Could be competition amongst whatever situation Lou and the boy shared with one another.
A review of Shamika's social media post uncovers some disturbing things.
Shamika often posted about her insecurities, and she shared her vulnerabilities with everyone. In one post, she says, I hide my pain and keep it moving on my own. I'm going to heal on my own. In another post, she says, all I do is smile while I'm crying on the inside.
People go to social media because they use it as an outlet. They can speak freely and they feel like they're not going to be judged, but a lot of times they're also reaching out for help. It appeared that she lived, or at least she was experiencing during that time, some troubling things in her life. Her relationship appeared, based on these posts, to be going through some troubles. She felt that she had no one she could really talk to. There were some barbs, apparently, where she mentioned being able to go through her man's cell phone without him having a conniption over it. How many people can do that? So it would lead us to believe that she had been dealing with some things relationship-wise prior to the incident with her and Lou.
Latorius was intimately involved with both women at the same time. And so that probably did, in fact, cause her to spend more time on social media, looking at the things that Lou would post and the things that Lou would share. It's as if Shamika used Facebook as her journal. I think for Shamika, not only was Lou the other woman, Lou was the better woman. On the outside looking in, it looked as if Lou had all the things that Shamika would have ever wanted. It's very possible that Shamika wanted to be her, in a sense.
These two shared barbs with one another on social media that we believe that was it was problematic to the point that when they saw each other, they wanted to fight it out.
Detectives find one recent post by Shamika that strikes them as especially odd.
So in a posting that Shamika made, she made reference to how she basically hated the month of July, and we were wondering why.
As authorities dig into Shamika's past, they make a disturbing discovery.
Police learned through further investigation that Kenyon Williams, the father of Shamika's children, was fatally stabbed by Shamika in July of the previous year.
She has run over another woman with a vehicle. A year and a day to the date that she had also killed the father of her children. She asked the question in her interview, why does this keep happening to me?
Why does it keep happening to me?
Well, it's because you keep making poor decisions.
Prosecutors found it difficult to prosecute the case in the stabbing death of Kenyon Williams because there was a long storied history of domestic violence incidents involving the couple.
If the evidence supports that he was in fact abusing her and that she had to defend herself, then that would be a justifiable homicide.
But it seems that the past was still haunting Shamika.
So we later learned that following the stabbing death of Kenyon Williams, Shamika did have a tattoo of his face tattooed on one of her arms.
And she keeps posting to social media.
You killed one person a year before, and now you killed my granddaughter. It seems like taking somebody's life is easy for her.
She's just empty. And to me, you have to be an evil person to commit a crime twice.
As investigators prepare to try Shamika Ellis for the murder of LaQuandalyn Hargrove, they find a series of inflammatory posts including one created by Lou the day before Shamika ran over her with an SUV.
Investigators discovered that Lou posted, "And I look better than that hoe. That's why she made you block me."
So in the post that Lou made, we're pretty sure that you may be talking about Shamika. So now this only further escalates the drama that these two have on social media.
Tracing all of Shamika's posts, it appears that the feud began between the two women a month earlier and had only continued to escalate.
I think that Lou was more aware of her beauty than Shamika was. I feel like at some point it does develop to some sort of hatred for her.
People can become obsessive. It's really scary. It's like a moth to a flame, pretty much.
She hated the fact that Lou was very comfortable and confident in who she was, and Shamika just was not there.
Detectives believe Shamika had become unhinged over her boyfriend Latorius Mitchell's infatuation with Lou, but they don't believe he was involved in her death.
Latorius did not face any charges in the murder of LaQuandalyn Hargrave.
I asked the DA why wasn't he charged, and she said because he stayed at the scene and literally got in the driver's seat and tried to back the truck off of her, and that he was a key witness.
He was in the truck. Turn the wheel or do something, you know.
That never sit right with me. But you know, the law is the law.
Just over a year after she was charged with second-degree murder, 22-year-old Shamika Ellis is led into a Shreveport courtroom for a preliminary hearing.
We're getting ready for the trial to take place on September 28th of 2020. And then she comes in and she indicates at that time that she wants to enter a plea of guilty.
I'm ready. I'm ready to go to trial. But she ended up copping out to a plea before trial. And I said, it's just was the Lord working. He didn't want me to see it. He knew I wasn't gonna be able to take it.
So the decision was made ultimately by the DA's office to accept her plea. Shamika was sentenced to 40 years in prison on a charge of manslaughter for the death of LaQuandalyn Hargrave.
When she was sentenced, did she ever express any remorse or ask for forgiveness?
She apologized, but to me, it was just because they told her to. You're not sorry that you killed her. You're just sorry because you're locked up.
To me, honestly, I mean, no length of time would give it justification. Like, it can't be justified at all.
But it all boils down to this. No matter, you know, what kind of rage we get in and how upset we still get about it, it's not going to bring Lou back. You know, it's not going to bring her back.
Her daughter is definitely a mini her. Same smile, eyes, face, everything.
The only thing that I learned out of this situation is life is real short. If I knew that that was going to happen, the only thing I wanted to say was I love you. And I'll see you on the other side.
One, two, three. We love you, Lou.
I talk to her all the time. She don't respond to me, of course, but I talk to her all the time. It's simple. I love you. I miss you. Continue watching over us.
I would like for everyone to remember Lou by that smile and those jokes and the dancing. She always danced. I want them to remember her by just being Lou. I mean, everybody loved Lou.
I really feel like if you didn't know her as a person, then you missed out. You really missed out, and I'm happy because I was right there.
On the cold morning of February 5th, 1985, the quiet town of Beatrice, Nebraska, woke to a nightmare that would haunt it for decades. Helen Wilson, a 68-year-old widow known for her kindness and routine, was found dead in her modest apartment. The scene was brutal, violent, disturbing in a way that shattered the illusion of safety in this close-knit Midwestern community. Neighbors described Helen as gentle and dependable. She was the kind of person who checked in on friends, attended church regularly, and kept to a familiar daily rhythm. Nothing about her life suggested danger. Nothing suggested that her name would one day become synonymous with one of the most controversial murder investigations in American criminal justice history. Police arrived at the apartment to find signs of a violent struggle. Helen had been beaten and sexually assaulted before being strangled. The attack was so savage that investigators immediately suspected the killer had acted with intense rage or desperation. Yet there was no obvious suspect, no clear witness, no immediate explanation for why Helen had been targeted. The crime scene yielded biological evidence, including semen, which investigators preserved for future testing. In 1985, DNA technology was still in its infancy. Detectives could not yet use the evidence to identify a suspect with certainty. Instead, they relied on traditional investigative methods: interviews, rumors, confessions, and the pressure to solve a case that had terrified an entire town. Beatrice was not a city accustomed to headline-making violence. Residents locked their doors more carefully after Helen's murder. Conversations in grocery stores and church parking lots turned to fear. Parents warned their children to be cautious. The question hung over the community like a storm cloud. Who could have done this? As weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. Detectives interviewed numerous individuals, but no one could be definitively linked to the crime. The biological evidence remained in storage, waiting for a scientific breakthrough that had not yet arrived. For Helen Wilson's family and friends, the lack of answers was agonizing. The case became a cold case, but it never truly went cold in the minds of those who live in Beatrice. Years later, the investigation took a dramatic and controversial turn. In the late 1980s, law enforcement focused on a group of local residents who would become known as the Beatrice Six. Through a series of interrogations, confessions, and accusations, 6 individuals were charged in connection with Helen Wilson's murder. The confessions appeared to provide the breakthrough investigators had been seeking. Some of the accused described details of the crime, and prosecutors argued that their statements corroborated one another. To many observers of the time, the case seemed solved. The community, desperate for closure, accepted the official narrative. But beneath the surface, troubling questions lingered. The confessions contained inconsistencies. Some details did not match the physical evidence. Defense attorneys argued that the suspects had been pressured, manipulated, or influenced during interrogations. Yet despite these concerns, all 6 individuals were convicted and sent to prison. For years, the Beatrice Six maintained varying accounts of what had happened, but the convictions stood. The case appeared closed. Helen Wilson's murder had been solved, and justice, at least officially, had been served. Then DNA technology changed everything. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, forensic science had advanced to the point where biological evidence from old cases could be tested with far greater precision. The semen collected from Helen Wilson's crime scene was finally analyzed using modern DNA testing methods. The results were stunning. The DNA did not match any of the 6 people convicted in the case. This revelation sent shockwaves through the legal system and the community of Beatrice. If the Beatrice Six were not the source of the biological evidence, then who was? Had 6 innocent people been imprisoned for a crime they did not commit? And if so, where was the real killer? Further DNA analysis identified a match to Joseph White, a local man who had died in 1994. White had never been charged with Helen Wilson's murder during his lifetime. He had not been one of the original suspects who stood trial. Yet the DNA evidence pointed directly to him as the source of the semen found at the crime scene. The discovery was both a breakthrough and a devastating indictment of the earlier investigation. The convictions of the Beatrice Six were overturned, and the 6 individuals were eventually exonerated. Their years in prison became a powerful example of the dangers of false confessions and flawed investigative practices. But the story did not end there. Joseph White was dead. He could not be interrogated, prosecuted, or confronted with the evidence. Investigators and prosecutors concluded that the DNA evidence strongly implicated him in the murder of Helen Wilson, but because he was no longer alive, many questions remained unanswered. How had White avoided suspicion during the original investigation? What had he been doing on the night of the murder? Did he act alone, or was someone else involved? And perhaps most haunting of all, why had 6 other people confessed to a crime they apparently did not commit? The case took on another layer of intrigue when investigators sought to confirm the DNA match through White's family. Relatives provided DNA samples that helped establish the familial connection. In the public imagination, this became a dramatic twist. More than 4 decades after the murder, the suspected killer was effectively identified through the genetic evidence linked to his own family line. The phrase exposed by a relative through DNA captured the eerie irony of the case. The very biological ties that connect families across generations have become the key to unraveling a decades-old mystery. Modern forensic science had reached backward through time, uncovering a truth that had remained hidden while innocent people suffered the consequences. For the exonerated members of the Beatrice Six, the DNA evidence brought vindication, but not peace. They had lost years of their lives to imprisonment. Their reputations had been damaged. Their families had endured public shame and emotional trauma. Even after their release, they faced the difficult task of rebuilding lives interrupted by wrongful convictions. For Helen Wilson's family, the DNA findings offered a different kind of closure. The evidence pointed to a likely perpetrator, but because White was deceased, there would be no trial, no courtroom testimony, no final verdict delivered in person. The legal system could acknowledge the DNA match, but it could not fully resolve every question surrounding the crime. The Helen Wilson case became a landmark example in discussions of wrongful convictions, forensic science, and the reliability of confessions. It demonstrated how intense pressure to solve a high-profile crime can lead investigators toward conclusions that later proved deeply flawed. It also showed the extraordinary power of DNA evidence to correct errors that once seemed irreversible. Yet despite the scientific breakthrough, the case retained an aura of mystery. Joseph White's DNA connected him to the crime scene, but the full story of what happened inside Helen Wilson's apartment on that February morning remains partly obscured by time. White never publicly explained his actions. He never faced cross-examination. He never provided a motive. The apartment where Helen Wilson lived became more than a crime scene. It became a symbol of unanswered questions. A quiet home in a small Nebraska town had become the center of a legal and forensic saga that would stretch across generations. Today, the murder of Helen Wilson is remembered not only for its brutality, but for the extraordinary journey from unsolved crime to wrongful convictions to DNA revelation. It is a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about memory, coercion, and the fallibility of the justice system. And at the center of it all remains Helen Wilson herself, a woman whose life was violently taken, whose death devastated a community, and whose case ultimately reshaped national conversations about justice. The DNA evidence may have identified a likely perpetrator, but the emotional scars of the case remain. For Beatrice, the murder was not just a crime. It was a wound that exposed the fragility of certainty and the terrifying possibility that the wrong people can be punished while the truth waits silently in a sealed evidence locker. More than 40 years after Helen Wilson's death, the case continues to resonate because it is both solved and unresolved. Solved in the sense that DNA evidence pointed to Joseph White. Unresolved in the sense that the full human story behind the murder may never be completely known. The quiet streets of Beatrice eventually returned to normal, but the memory of that winter morning never disappeared. The town learned that justice can be delayed, distorted, and painfully difficult to achieve. And the name Helen Wilson became forever linked to a case that changed how America thinks about evidence, confession, and the pursuit of truth. As the weeks following Helen Wilson's murder turned into months, the urgency surrounding the investigation only intensified. Beatrice was a community unaccustomed to violent crime. Residents expected answers, and law enforcement faced mounting pressure to identify whoever had entered the apartment of a 68-year-old widow and left behind one of the most disturbing crime scenes the town had ever witnessed. Investigators worked every lead they could develop. Friends, neighbors, acquaintances, and local residents were interviewed repeatedly. Detectives examined Helen Wilson's daily routine, searching for any indication that she had been targeted because of a personal dispute, a robbery, or a chance encounter. None of those theories produced a clear suspect. The crime scene itself suggested a violent struggle. Evidence indicated that Wilson had been sexually assaulted before she was killed. Biological evidence was carefully collected and preserved, a routine procedure that would prove far more significant decades later than anyone involved in 1985 could have imagined. At the time, however, forensic science had not yet reached the point where DNA profiling could identify an unknown offender with certainty. With no definitive forensic answer available, investigators increasingly relied on interviews and statements. As the investigation continued, attention gradually shifted toward a group of local individuals whose lives would become permanently intertwined with the case. Between 1988 and 1989, nearly 4 years after the murder, investigators and mental health professionals conducted extensive interviews with several suspects. The investigation evolved in an unusual direction. Rather than being driven primarily by physical evidence, it became increasingly centered on confessions. Several of the individuals eventually charged had intellectual disabilities or significant psychological vulnerabilities. During repeated interviews, investigators sought to reconstruct what had happened inside Helen Wilson's apartment. Over time, multiple suspects began making incriminating statements. At first glance, the confessions appeared compelling. Different individuals described participating in the crime. Some implicated themselves. Others implicated one another. Prosecutors argued that the overlapping accounts demonstrated that the suspects possessed knowledge only those involved could have known. To many observers, the case seemed solved. Yet beneath the apparent consistency were important contradictions. The statements did not always agree on who entered the apartment first. They differed about the sequence of events, the weapons allegedly used, and even the number of participants. Some details changed from one interview to the next. Other descriptions conflicted with the physical evidence documented at the crime scene. These inconsistencies would later become central to understanding what had happened during the investigation. At the time, however, investigators believed they were witnessing guilty individuals gradually revealing the truth. Eventually, 6 people were prosecuted for Helen Wilson's murder. The group would later become widely known as the Beatrice Six. Each prosecution relied heavily on confessions rather than forensic evidence directly linking the defendants to the crime scene. Nevertheless, juries accepted the government's case, and convictions followed. For the Wilson family, the verdicts appeared to bring long-awaited justice. For the town of Beatrice, the arrest seemed to close one of the darkest chapters in its history. Life slowly moved forward. the convicted individuals began serving lengthy prison sentences. The murder case gradually disappeared from newspaper headlines. But outside the public spotlight, questions never completely disappeared. Legal advocates continued examining the circumstances surrounding the confessions. Experts studying police interrogations increasingly recognized that false confessions, although counterintuitive, occurred more frequently than previously believed. Research identified several factors that could increase vulnerability during questioning, including prolonged interrogation, psychological pressure, suggestive interviewing techniques, and intellectual impairment. Those broader findings would eventually cast a different light on the Beatrice investigation. Years passed. Meanwhile, forensic science underwent a revolution. Throughout the 1990s, DNA analysis became one of the most powerful tools in criminal investigations. Cases once considered impossible to solve suddenly became candidates for renewed examination. Across the United States, biological evidence preserved from older investigations was tested using methods unavailable when those crimes had originally been investigated. Some tests confirmed earlier convictions. Others overturned them. The Helen Wilson case would become one of the most consequential examples of the latter. Attorneys representing several members of the Beatrice Six sought DNA testing of the biological evidence recovered from the crime scene. The request reflected growing confidence that modern forensic science could answer questions that witness testimony alone could not. When testing was finally performed, the results fundamentally altered the case. The biological evidence excluded every member of the Beatrice Six. Not one of the 6 individuals convicted of murder matched the DNA profile obtained from the semen recovered during the investigation. The finding created an extraordinary legal dilemma. If the confessions were true, why did none of the defendants match the biological evidence? If the DNA accurately identified the offender, how had 6 people come to confess to participating in a crime they apparently had not committed? Those questions would become the focus of renewed legal proceedings. Courts reconsidered the convictions. Experts testified about interrogation methods and false confessions. Forensic specialists explained the significance of the DNA evidence. Gradually, the foundations supporting the original prosecutions began to collapse. The same confessions that had once appeared persuasive were now examined through an entirely different lens. Rather than demonstrating guilt, critics argued they reflected contamination, suggestion, and the psychological effects of repeated questioning. The physical evidence, preserved for years inside an evidence locker, had ultimately proved more reliable than memory or confession. It marked a profound shift in how many investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges viewed serious criminal cases. The Helen Wilson investigation was no longer simply a homicide case. It had become an important example in the national conversation about forensic science and wrongful convictions. And yet one critical question remained unanswered. If the Beatrice Six had been excluded, whose DNA had investigators actually found inside Helen Wilson's apartment? The answer would emerge only after investigators compared the unknown DNA profile against additional samples, a process that would point toward a man who had never stood trial for the crime, and who was no longer alive to answer the questions that still surrounded one of Nebraska's most infamous murder cases. The DNA profile recovered from Helen Wilson's apartment remained unchanged for years. Unlike witness memories, it did not fade. Unlike confessions, it did not shift with repeated questioning. It existed as a biological record of someone who had been present during the assault, waiting for forensic science to catch up with the evidence preserved in 1985. Once the 6 convicted individuals were excluded, investigators turned to a new question. Whose DNA was it? Rather than searching for evidence to support an existing theory, forensic analysts worked from the genetic profile itself. The sample was compared with available records and examined alongside information gathered during the original investigation. As DNA technology became increasingly sophisticated, investigators were able to pursue leads that had not been possible when the murder first occurred. The testing ultimately identified the DNA as belonging to Joseph White, a Beatrice resident who had died in 1994. White had never been convicted of Helen Wilson's murder. He was no longer alive when the DNA evidence was developed, making it impossible to question him about the crime or present the evidence in court. Nonetheless, investigators concluded that the biological evidence strongly implicated him in the sexual assault connected to Wilson's killing. The identification immediately changed the direction of the case. For years, public attention had focused on the Beatrice Six and the controversial confessions that secured their convictions. Now the forensic evidence pointed elsewhere. The contrast between the original investigation and the later DNA findings became impossible to ignore. Legal proceedings followed. As courts reviewed the convictions, DNA evidence became the central issue. Judges weighed the scientific findings alongside the circumstances under which the confessions had been obtained. Over time, the convictions were overturned, and the 6 defendants were exonerated. The reversals represented more than corrections to individual cases. They illustrated how advances in forensic science could reshape the understanding of events long thought settled. Attention also turned to the investigative methods used during the late 1980s. Experts in psychology, criminal investigations, and wrongful convictions examined how false confessions can occur. Research had increasingly shown that some individuals, particularly those with intellectual disabilities, mental illness, or heightened suggestibility, may confess to crimes they did not commit under certain interrogation conditions. Those confessions can sometimes contain details introduced during questioning rather than independently remembered by the suspect. The Beatrice case became one of the examples frequently discussed in legal and academic circles when examining interrogation practices and the importance of corroborating confessions with independent physical evidence. Meanwhile, investigators sought to strengthen the DNA identification involving Joseph White. Because White had died years earlier, confirming the findings required additional forensic work. DNA from biological relatives helped support the identification through familial comparison, reinforcing investigators' conclusion that the crime scene profile belonged to White. This development attracted widespread attention. Advances in genetics had effectively allowed investigators to confirm the identity of a deceased suspect years after the homicide. The same scientific progress that had cleared 6 innocent people also provided the strongest evidence pointing toward a different individual. Even so, significant questions remained. DNA established a powerful connection between White and the biological evidence recovered at the crime scene. It did not, by itself, answer every question surrounding the murder. Investigators could not ask White to explain his actions, his relationship, if any, to Helen Wilson, or the sequence of events that led to her death. As a result, some aspects of the crime remain unknown. Public records indicate that investigators concluded White acted alone, but because no criminal trial occurred, the evidence was never presented before a jury for adjudication. The absence of that final judicial process means that some questions about motive and the precise circumstances of the killing may never receive definitive answers. For the members of the Beatrice Six, exoneration did not erase the years already lost. Many had spent substantial portions of their lives in prison. Beyond incarceration, they faced damaged reputations, strained family relationships, and the lasting consequences of convictions that were later determined to be wrongful. Their cases became part of broader discussions about compensation for wrongful convictions and the challenges faced by individuals after exoneration. For Helen Wilson's family, the outcome was equally complex. The DNA evidence offered a clearer understanding of who was connected to the crime scene, yet it did not provide the opportunity to hear testimony from the identified suspect or to witness a criminal trial. The legal resolution differed dramatically from what might have occurred had the evidence been available in 1985. The murder of Helen Wilson ultimately became significant for two distinct reasons. First, it remained a tragic homicide that devastated a family and shocked a small Nebraska community. Second, it became a landmark example of how forensic science can both identify a previously unknown suspect and expose serious failures in a criminal investigation. More than 4 decades after Helen Wilson's death, the case continues to be studied by lawyers, investigators, forensic scientists, and criminal justice scholars. It serves as a reminder that physical evidence can outlast assumptions, and that scientific advances may fundamentally alter the understanding of cases once believed to be solved. The questions that remain today are fewer than they once were, but they have not disappeared entirely. The DNA evidence answered one of the investigation's central mysteries. It also revealed how easily certainty can give way to doubt when new evidence emerges. And with that realization, the Helen Wilson case secured its place not only in Nebraska's history, but also in the broader history of modern forensic investigation and wrongful convictions. The exoneration of the Beatrice Six did not mark the end of the Helen Wilson case. Instead, it shifted the focus from a criminal prosecution to a broader examination of how the investigation unfolded and why it had gone so dramatically wrong. What had once been viewed as a successful homicide investigation was now scrutinized by legal experts, psychologists, forensic scientists, and journalists seeking to understand how 6 innocent people had come to be convicted. One of the central issues was the role of confession evidence. For decades, confessions had been regarded as among the most persuasive forms of evidence presented in court. Jurors often viewed a defendant's own admission of guilt as difficult to dispute. However, research conducted over the years following the Wilson investigation demonstrated that false confessions can and do occur under certain circumstances. Studies identified several factors that increase the risk of unreliable confessions, including prolonged questioning, suggestive interviewing techniques, psychological vulnerability, fatigue, and a desire to satisfy investigators or end an interrogation. Experts emphasize that these risks are particularly significant when questioning individuals with intellectual disabilities or cognitive impairments. The Beatrice Six case became an example frequently cited in discussions about these issues. During later legal proceedings, defense attorneys and experts argued that the confessions were not supported by the physical evidence, and that key details had evolved over multiple interviews rather than emerging independently from the suspects themselves. The DNA evidence fundamentally altered how those statements were interpreted. Instead of viewing similarities among the confessions as proof of guilt, critics questioned whether information had unintentionally been shared during the investigative process, creating accounts that appeared consistent while lacking independent reliability. The case also highlighted the importance of preserving physical evidence. Investigators in 1985 had collected biological material from the crime scene and retained it for years. Although the technology to fully analyze that evidence did not yet exist, proper preservation ultimately allowed later forensic testing to answer questions that could not be resolved at the time of the original investigation. This aspect of the case has been recognized as one of the enduring lessons for law enforcement agencies. Evidence that may appear inconclusive today can become critically important as scientific methods advance. Maintaining the integrity of physical evidence allows future investigators to revisit cases using technologies unavailable during the original inquiry. For the 6 individuals whose convictions were overturned, exoneration represented legal vindication, but not a return to the lives they had known before the investigation. Years spent in prison had affected employment opportunities, family relationships, financial stability, and public reputation. Some sought compensation through civil litigation, arguing that the investigation and prosecution had caused profound and lasting harm. The resulting legal actions extended the story beyond the original homicide investigation. Courts examined not only the criminal convictions, but also the conduct of investigators and prosecutors. These proceedings contributed to continuing debates about accountability, investigative practices, and safeguards intended to reduce the risk of wrongful convictions. Meanwhile, Joseph White remained at the center of the forensic findings. Because he had died years before the DNA analysis identified him, many questions could never be answered directly. Investigators concluded that the biological evidence strongly connected him to the crime scene, yet the absence of a criminal trial meant that the evidence was never tested through the full adversarial process of a courtroom. Consequently, while the DNA findings reshaped the understanding of the case, some aspects of the events surrounding Helen Wilson's murder remain unknown. The Wilson investigation continues to be referenced in discussions about the evolution of forensic science. It demonstrates both the strengths and limitations of different forms of evidence. Witness testimony, confessions, and investigative judgment all play important roles in criminal cases, but the case illustrates why those forms of evidence must be carefully evaluated alongside objective forensic findings whenever possible. More broadly, the case contributed to growing awareness of wrongful convictions across the United States. Alongside other exonerations made possible through DNA testing, it reinforced the importance of post-conviction review and scientific re-examination of evidence in cases where significant questions remain. Today, the murder of Helen Wilson is remembered not only because of the tragedy itself, but because of its lasting impact on criminal justice. The investigation exposed vulnerabilities that have influenced law enforcement training, interrogation practices, forensic procedures, and legal scholarship. It also serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice does not necessarily end with a conviction. In some cases, the search for the truth continues for decades, guided by new evidence and advances in science that were unimaginable when the crime first occurred. As legal proceedings surrounding the Beatrice 6 came to an end, the Helen Wilson case increasingly became a subject of academic study rather than an active criminal investigation. Universities, law schools, forensic organizations, and innocence advocacy groups examined the case to better understand how multiple failures within the criminal justice system could converge in a single investigation. One of the most significant lessons involved the relationship between confession evidence and forensic evidence. Historically, a confession was often considered one of the strongest forms of proof available to prosecutors. Yet the Wilson case demonstrated that a confession, even when detailed, cannot be evaluated in isolation. Independent physical evidence remains essential to determining whether a statement accurately reflects what occurred. Researchers also examined the investigative process itself. Modern best practices increasingly emphasize recording interviews, documenting the source of every factual detail disclosed during questioning, and distinguishing between information volunteered by a suspect and information introduced by investigators. These safeguards are intended to reduce the possibility that an interrogation inadvertently shapes a suspect's account. The preservation of biological evidence proved equally important. When investigators collected forensic samples in 1985, they could not have anticipated the capabilities of DNA analysis that would emerge years later. Nonetheless, because the evidence was properly retained, later testing provided answers that conventional investigative techniques had failed to uncover. The case has therefore been cited as an example of the long-term value of evidence preservation. Advances in forensic science continue to improve the ability to analyze older evidence, making it possible to revisit unresolved or disputed cases decades after the original investigation. For the members of the Beatrice 6, exoneration marked the beginning of another difficult chapter. Legal innocence did not erase the years spent incarcerated or the personal consequences of wrongful convictions. Rebuilding careers, restoring relationships, and adjusting to life after imprisonment presented challenges that extended well beyond the courtroom. Some pursued civil claims seeking compensation for the harm they had suffered. These proceedings drew additional public attention to the case and raised broader questions about governmental accountability when wrongful convictions occur. While the outcomes of civil litigation vary according to legal standards and the specific facts presented, the discussion surrounding the case contributed to ongoing policy debates concerning compensation and criminal justice reform. For Helen Wilson's family, the passage of time brought a different perspective. The DNA evidence significantly clarified investigators' understanding of who was connected to the crime scene, but the identified suspect's death meant there would never be a criminal trial. As a result, the family received important forensic answers without experiencing the formal conclusion that accompanies a courtroom verdict. This distinction illustrates an important reality in many cold cases. Scientific advances can establish powerful evidence years after a crime. Yet practical limitations, such as the death of a suspect or the loss of witnesses, may prevent a traditional prosecution. Even when significant questions are resolved, complete legal closure is not always possible. The broader influence of the Helen Wilson investigation extends beyond Nebraska. It has become part of a national conversation about wrongful convictions, forensic reliability, and the continual evolution of investigative practices. Criminal justice professionals frequently reference the case when discussing the need to corroborate confessions with objective evidence and to remain open to re-examining conclusions as new technology becomes available. The case also reflects the transformative impact of DNA analysis on modern criminal investigations. Since the late 20th century, DNA testing has helped identify perpetrators, exclude innocent suspects, and overturn wrongful convictions in numerous jurisdictions. The Wilson case remains one of the most notable examples because the same forensic evidence that implicated a previously unidentified individual also demonstrated that 6 convicted people could not have been responsible for the biological evidence recovered from the scene. Today, the legacy of the investigation is measured not only by the questions it answered, but also by the institutional changes it encouraged. Investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and forensic scientists continue to study cases like this to improve investigative methods and strengthen safeguards designed to reduce the risk of future miscarriages of justice. More than 4 decades after Helen Wilson's death, the case continues to remind observers that justice is not a single event, but an ongoing process. As science advances and legal systems evolve, previously accepted conclusions may require careful re-examination. The pursuit of truth often depends not only on the determination of investigators, but also on the willingness of institutions to reconsider past decisions in light of new and reliable evidence. The murder of Helen Wilson ultimately came to represent more than a single criminal investigation. It became a case study in the evolution of forensic science and the importance of maintaining confidence in the criminal justice system through continual review of evidence. Although the homicide itself occurred in 1985, its influence has extended across decades as investigators, courts, and researchers have revisited the lessons it provides. One of the most enduring themes is the role of DNA evidence in post-conviction review. When Helen Wilson was killed, forensic investigators could identify blood types and other biological characteristics, but the ability to generate highly discriminating DNA profiles had not yet become a routine investigative tool. As technology advanced during the 1990s and early 2000s, evidence that had remained dormant for years acquired new significance. The biological material collected from the crime scene became the foundation for reassessing conclusions that had previously appeared settled. Rather than relying on recollections formed years after the crime or statements obtained during interrogations, forensic scientists were able to analyze physical evidence that had remained unchanged since the day investigators first documented the scene. This distinction is critical in criminal investigations. Human memory can be incomplete or influenced by later experiences. Witness accounts may differ. Confessions require careful evaluation to determine their reliability and the circumstances under which they were obtained. Properly preserved biological evidence, by contrast, can often be re-examined using increasingly sophisticated scientific methods. The Wilson case therefore reinforced the value of preserving evidence even after convictions have been obtained. Across the United States, many law enforcement agencies expanded evidence retention policies in recognition that future scientific advances could provide answers unavailable at the time of trial. The investigation also became part of broader discussions about wrongful convictions. Organizations dedicated to reviewing disputed criminal cases frequently cite the importance of corroborating every significant allegation with independent evidence whenever possible. While confessions, eyewitness testimony, and circumstantial evidence remain important components of criminal prosecutions, the case illustrates why each form of evidence must be evaluated within the context of the entire record. Legal scholars have likewise examined how the case affected public confidence in the justice system. Wrongful convictions not only harm innocent individuals, they also delay accountability for the person actually responsible. When investigative errors occur, victims' families may wait years, or even decades, for reliable answers. For Helen Wilson's family, the passage of time produced both clarity and limitation. DNA testing substantially altered investigators' understanding of the case. Yet the identified suspect's death before the forensic breakthrough meant that many questions could never be addressed in court. The scientific evidence answered one central issue while leaving other aspects of the crime beyond the reach of the judicial process. The experience of the Beatrice Six followed a different trajectory. After their convictions were overturned, their cases became part of a growing body of exoneration research examining the long-term effects of wrongful imprisonment. Studies have shown that individuals who are exonerated often face significant challenges after release, including rebuilding careers, restoring family relationships, and adapting to life after years of incarceration. These experiences contributed to continuing discussions about compensation statutes, post-release support, and institutional reforms designed to reduce the likelihood of similar errors in future investigations. The Wilson case also encouraged ongoing improvements in investigative practice. Modern homicide investigations increasingly emphasize comprehensive forensic documentation, recorded interviews, peer review of major case decisions, and multidisciplinary collaboration among detectives, forensic scientists, prosecutors, and defense counsel. While no investigative system can eliminate every possibility of error, these developments reflect efforts to strengthen the reliability of criminal investigations through both scientific and procedural safeguards. Today, the murder of Helen Wilson occupies an important place in discussions of criminal justice reform. It demonstrates how advances in science can reshape historical investigations and underscores the responsibility of legal institutions to reassess prior conclusions when credible new evidence emerges. The case is studied not only because of the crime itself, but because it illustrates the complex relationship between forensic evidence, investigative judgment, and the pursuit of justice. More than 40 years after Helen Wilson's death, the investigation continues to be remembered for the profound impact it has had on forensic practice and legal scholarship. Its legacy extends beyond one community in Nebraska, serving as a reminder that the search for truth is an ongoing process, one that depends on careful evidence, scientific integrity, and a willingness to revisit the past when new facts come to light. As the legal proceedings concluded, the Helen Wilson case entered a different phase. It was no longer defined primarily by the search for a suspect or by courtroom arguments. Instead, it became a reference point for evaluating how criminal investigations are conducted and how the justice system responds when new scientific evidence fundamentally changes the understanding of a case. One of the most significant aspects of the case is the contrast between the evidence available in 1985 and the evidence available years later. At the time of the original investigation, detectives relied on the investigative tools then considered standard: witness interviews, physical examination of the crime scene, forensic testing within the technological limits of the period, and the evaluation of statements made by potential suspects. As DNA profiling developed into a reliable forensic technique, investigators gained access to a form of evidence that was unavailable when a murder occurred. The preserved biological material from the crime scene became the basis for reassessing conclusions that had once appeared settled. This progression reflects a broader trend in criminal justice. Numerous cold cases have been revisited as advances in forensic science have allowed investigators to extract new information from evidence collected decades earlier. In some investigations, those advances have strengthened existing conclusions. In others, including the Helen Wilson case, they have required a fundamental reassessment of earlier findings. The case also illustrates the importance of post-conviction review. Criminal convictions are intended to provide legal finality, but legal systems also recognize that new evidence may emerge after trial. Appeals, post-conviction proceedings, and forensic reexaminations exist in part to address situations in which reliable new information becomes available. For legal scholars, the Wilson investigation demonstrates that finality and accuracy must be carefully balanced. A justice system seeks both to resolve cases and to ensure that those resolutions are supported by the best available evidence. The experience of the Beatrice Six has consequently become part of educational programs for lawyers, judges, investigators, and forensic professionals. Discussions often focus on the need to corroborate confession evidence, the importance of objective forensic analysis, and the value of maintaining complete investigative records that can later be reviewed if questions arise. Psychologists have likewise examined the case in the context of research into interrogation practices. Modern training increasingly emphasizes interviewing methods designed to gather reliable information while reducing the risk of contamination or inaccurate admissions. These developments reflect decades of research into human memory, communication, and decision-making under stressful conditions. The preservation of evidence remains another enduring lesson. Biological samples, photographs, reports, and other investigative materials may appear to have limited value at the time they are collected. However, as forensic technology continues to evolve, those same materials may become critical sources of information many years later. For that reason, agencies across many jurisdictions have strengthened policies governing evidence retention, documentation, and chain of custody. The ability to revisit older cases often depends on the quality and completeness of evidence preserved during the original investigation. The Wilson case also underscores the role of forensic science as one component of a broader investigative process. DNA evidence can establish or exclude biological connections with remarkable accuracy, but investigators must still interpret those findings within the context of all available evidence. Scientific results answer some questions directly, while leaving others to be evaluated through additional investigation. Although investigators concluded that the DNA evidence strongly implicated Joseph White, his death before the forensic identification meant that many factual questions surrounding the homicide could never be explored through a criminal trial. Consequently, while the scientific evidence significantly clarified the case, some aspects of the events remain unknown. For Helen Wilson's family, the passage of time inevitably shaped the meaning of justice. Advances in science provided information that had been unavailable for many years, yet no technological development could reverse the loss suffered in 1985. The investigation ultimately produced greater clarity about the evidence, but could not erase decades of uncertainty or restore what had been taken. Today, the Helen Wilson case continues to be cited in discussions of wrongful convictions, forensic science, and criminal procedure. Its significance lies not only in the facts of the homicide, but also in the institutional lessons that emerge from the investigation. It demonstrates how scientific progress can improve the accuracy of criminal investigations and why legal systems must remain open to reconsidering prior conclusions when credible new evidence is presented. More than 40 years after the crime, the case remains an important example of the continuing relationship between science and justice. It reminds investigators, lawyers, and courts alike that the pursuit of truth does not end when a verdict is entered. In some cases, the most significant evidence may not reveal its full value until many years later, when advances in technology allow the facts to be examined with greater precision than ever before. As the Helen Wilson investigation moved from active litigation into historical analysis, it became one of the cases most frequently referenced in discussions about the intersection of forensic science and criminal justice. The significance of the case lies not only in the outcome, but also in the sequence of events that led to that outcome. It demonstrates how advances in science can fundamentally change the interpretation of evidence collected decades earlier. The preserved biological evidence played a central role in this transformation. When investigators documented the crime scene in 1985, they followed procedures intended to preserve physical evidence for future examination. Although DNA profiling was not yet available as a practical investigative tool, careful collection and storage ensured that later generations of forensic scientists could analyze the evidence using techniques that did not exist at the time of the homicide. This experience reinforced a broader principle within forensic investigations. Evidence should be preserved whenever possible because future scientific developments may reveal information that cannot be obtained using contemporary methods. Across many jurisdictions, evidence retention policies have evolved in recognition of this possibility. The case has also been studied in relation to post-conviction review. Legal systems generally seek to provide certainty through final judgments, but they also recognize that new evidence may emerge after trial. DNA testing has become one of the most significant developments in this area, allowing courts to revisit convictions when reliable scientific evidence raises substantial questions about earlier conclusions. In the Wilson case, DNA analysis did more than identify a previously uncharged individual connected to the biological evidence. It also demonstrated that the 6 convicted defendants could not be linked to that evidence. This dual function, identifying one individual while excluding others, illustrates why DNA testing has become such an influential tool in criminal investigations. Researchers have further examined the case as part of broader studies concerning wrongful convictions. Those studies consistently emphasize that errors rarely result from a single factor. Instead, wrongful convictions often arise through the interaction of multiple circumstances, including mistaken assumptions, investigative limitations, unreliable testimony, or incomplete forensic capabilities available at the time of the original investigation. The Wilson investigation is therefore frequently discussed as an example of the importance of evaluating all forms of evidence collectively rather than relying too heavily on any single source. Confessions, witness statements, physical evidence, and forensic findings each contribute to an investigation, but each must be assessed critically and independently. Another enduring lesson concerns transparency. Modern investigative practices increasingly encourage comprehensive documentation of interviews, forensic examinations, and decision-making processes. Such documentation assists courts in reviewing cases years later and allows experts to evaluate investigative methods using complete records rather than relying on recollection alone. For Helen Wilson's family, the passage of time inevitably altered the nature of the investigation. Decades separated the original crime from the forensic developments that reshaped the case. During that period, witnesses aged, memories faded, and one of the individuals ultimately identified through DNA had already died. These realities demonstrate the practical challenges associated with resolving serious crimes many years after they occur, even when significant scientific advances become available. The case also continues to inform professional education. Law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, defense attorneys, forensic scientists, and judges have examined its history when considering best practices for homicide investigations and post-conviction review. While procedures continue to evolve, the underlying objective remains consistent, ensuring that investigative conclusions are supported by reliable evidence and remain open to reconsideration if credible new information emerges. Today, the Helen Wilson case occupies an important place in the history of American criminal justice. It illustrates both the remarkable capabilities of modern forensic science and the necessity of maintaining rigorous standards throughout every stage of a criminal investigation. The lessons drawn from the case extend beyond Nebraska, contributing to ongoing efforts to strengthen investigative practices, improve forensic reliability, and enhance confidence in the justice system. More than 40 years after Helen Wilson's death, the investigation continues to be remembered not only because of the tragedy itself, but because it demonstrates how science, law, and careful review can reshape long-held assumptions. The case remains a reminder that the search for truth is an evolving process, one that depends on preserving evidence, applying reliable scientific methods, and remaining willing to re-examine conclusions whenever new facts warrant renewed scrutiny. Looking back on the Helen Wilson case, one of its most enduring features is the contrast between certainty at one point in time and certainty based on later scientific evidence. During the original prosecutions, the convictions appeared to bring finality to a community seeking answers. Years later, advances in forensic science demonstrated that the evidence required a different interpretation. That evolution illustrates how criminal investigations can change as technology and knowledge progress. The case is now regularly discussed alongside other exonerations made possible through DNA testing. Collectively, these cases have influenced criminal justice policy in the United States by encouraging broader access to post-conviction DNA analysis, improving standards for evidence preservation, and promoting greater awareness of the possibility of wrongful convictions. For forensic scientists, the investigation underscores the importance of maintaining rigorous laboratory procedures and preserving the integrity of biological evidence. Scientific conclusions depend on careful collection, secure storage, validated testing methods, and accurate interpretation. The value of the evidence recovered in 1985 rested not only on technological advances decades later, but also on the fact that it had been preserved in a manner that allowed reliable testing. For investigators, the case reinforces another principle. Physical evidence should be evaluated alongside, rather than subordinate to, testimonial evidence. Interviews, witness statements, and confessions remain important investigative tools, but each must be considered within the broader evidentiary record. Independent corroboration strengthens confidence in investigative conclusions and reduces the likelihood of error. The legal consequences of the case likewise extend beyond the individuals directly involved. Courts and legal scholars have examined the investigation when discussing standards for post-conviction review and the role of newly discovered scientific evidence. The case demonstrates that legal systems must be capable of reconsidering prior judgments when reliable new evidence materially changes the factual record. Educational institutions have also incorporated the case into coursework involving criminal procedure, forensic science, and legal ethics. Students studying these disciplines often examine the chronology of the investigation to understand how investigative decisions, available technology, and subsequent scientific developments interacted over time. Another important aspect of the case is its contribution to public understanding of DNA evidence. Since the late 20th century, DNA analysis has become widely recognized as one of the most reliable forms of forensic identification when properly collected and interpreted. The Wilson investigation illustrates both its ability to identify an individual connected to biological evidence and its equally important role in excluding those who were not. At the same time, forensic experts caution that DNA evidence, while powerful, does not answer every question in every investigation. Biological evidence may establish that an individual was connected to a crime scene, but investigators must still evaluate the surrounding circumstances using all available evidence. As with any form of evidence, interpretation requires careful analysis and consideration of the complete factual context. The passage of time also shaped the investigation in significant ways. By the time DNA testing fundamentally altered the understanding of the case, many years had elapsed since the homicide. Memories had faded, some participants had died, and opportunities for additional investigation have become more limited. These realities highlight the importance of conducting thorough investigations at the earliest possible stage while preserving evidence for future review if necessary. For the Beatrice community, the case remains part of local history. It is remembered both for the tragic loss of Helen Wilson and for the profound legal developments that followed. While the investigation evolved dramatically over the decades, the underlying objective remained constant: determining the most accurate account of what the available evidence could establish. Today, the Helen Wilson case continues to serve as a reminder that the pursuit of justice is closely connected to the pursuit of accuracy. Scientific advances, careful evidence preservation, and independent judicial review all contribute to that objective. Although no investigation can eliminate every uncertainty, the lessons drawn from this case have influenced practices intended to improve the reliability of future criminal investigations. More than 4 decades after the homicide, the case stands as an example of how criminal justice systems can learn from past investigations. Its legacy is reflected not only in legal decisions and forensic developments, but also in the continuing effort to ensure that investigative conclusions remain grounded in objective evidence and are open to reconsideration when credible new information becomes available. By the time the Helen Wilson case reached its 4th decade, its significance extended well beyond the original homicide investigation. It had become part of the broader history of forensic science in the United States, illustrating how developments in technology can reshape legal conclusions reached years earlier. The case is now frequently referenced not because it followed a typical investigative path, but because it demonstrated how the preservation of evidence and the application of modern scientific methods can fundamentally alter the understanding of a criminal case. One of the most important legacies of the investigation is its contribution to discussions about evidence-based decision-making. Criminal investigations often require investigators to assess information from many different sources, including witness accounts, physical evidence, forensic testing, and investigative interviews. The Wilson case illustrates why each category of evidence must be evaluated independently and then considered together before drawing conclusions. The evolution of forensic DNA analysis has played a central role in that process. Since the 1980s, DNA technology has become increasingly sensitive, reliable, and widely available. Techniques that were once limited to specialized laboratories are now standard tools in many criminal investigations. As scientific capabilities have improved, agencies have revisited older cases in which preserved biological evidence can be analyzed using methods unavailable during the original investigation. The Wilson case demonstrates both the strengths and the practical limitations of these advances. DNA evidence substantially clarified investigators' understanding of who was connected to the biological material recovered from the crime scene. At the same time, because the identified individual had died before the forensic findings emerged, the evidence could not be examined through a criminal trial. This distinction highlights an important reality. Scientific discoveries can answer significant factual questions even when legal proceedings are no longer possible. The investigation has also informed discussions about institutional learning within the criminal justice system. Police agencies, prosecutors, forensic laboratories, and courts routinely review notable cases to identify opportunities for improving investigative practices. The lessons drawn from the Wilson case have contributed to continued emphasis on evidence preservation, comprehensive documentation, recorded interviews, and careful evaluation of confession evidence in conjunction with independent forensic findings. Academic researchers have likewise examined the investigation from multiple perspectives. Legal scholars have explored the standards governing post-conviction review and newly discovered evidence. Psychologists have considered the factors that may affect the reliability of statements obtained during investigative interviews. Forensic scientists have analyzed the role of biological evidence in resolving disputed factual issues. Together, these studies have helped place the case within a broader framework of criminal justice reform and scientific advancement. Another enduring aspect of the case is its influence on public understanding of wrongful convictions. DNA exonerations across the United States have demonstrated that errors can occur despite the efforts of investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, and juries. These cases have reinforced the importance of procedural safeguards designed to reduce the risk of error while maintaining the ability to revisit convictions when reliable new evidence becomes available. For Helen Wilson's family, the passage of time inevitably changed the nature of the investigation. Although later forensic developments provided greater clarity regarding the biological evidence, no advancement in science could reverse the loss experienced in 1985. The case therefore illustrates both the capabilities and the limitations of the criminal justice system. Scientific evidence can improve factual understanding, but it cannot restore what has been lost. Today, the murder of Helen Wilson continues to be examined by professionals and researchers because it presents multiple lessons within a single investigation. It demonstrates the importance of preserving evidence, the value of independent forensic analysis, the necessity of corroborating investigative findings, and the continuing role of post-conviction review in maintaining confidence in the justice system. More than 40 years after the crime, the investigation remains an example of how the search for truth may continue long after an initial verdict has been reached. As forensic science evolves and legal institutions adapt to new forms of evidence, the Helen Wilson case continues to remind investigators, courts, and the public that accuracy is an essential component of justice. Its lasting significance lies not only in the resolution of critical factual questions, but also in the enduring lessons it provides for future investigations. More than 4 decades have passed since Helen Wilson was killed in her apartment in Beatrice, Nebraska. During those years, the case evolved from an unsolved homicide to a prosecution that resulted in 6 convictions, and ultimately to one of the most widely discussed examples of how DNA evidence can transform the understanding of a criminal investigation. Few cases have demonstrated so clearly the profound impact that advances in forensic science can have on both identifying individuals connected to a crime scene and correcting wrongful convictions. The investigation also illustrates how criminal justice is an evolving process rather than a static one. Decisions are made using the best evidence available at a given time, but those decisions may later be reassessed when reliable new evidence emerges. The preservation of biological evidence in 1985 made that reassessment possible. Without it, many of the questions raised decades later could never have been addressed through scientific analysis. The identification of Joseph White through DNA evidence significantly changed investigators' understanding of the case. At the same time, because White died before the forensic developments that implicated him, the criminal justice system could not test that evidence through a public trial. As a result, while the forensic findings answered one of the investigation's central questions, they did not resolve every aspect of the events surrounding Helen Wilson's death. The exoneration of the Beatrice Six became an equally important part of the case's legacy. Their convictions were overturned after DNA testing excluded them from the biological evidence recovered at the crime scene. Their experiences have since contributed to national discussions about wrongful convictions, post-conviction review, and the importance of corroborating confession evidence with independent forensic findings. For legal scholars, investigators, and forensic scientists, the Wilson case remains a valuable educational example. It demonstrates why evidence preservation matters, why scientific advances can require the re-examination of long-standing conclusions, and why criminal investigations benefit from continuous evaluation of both investigative methods and forensic techniques. The case has also influenced broader conversations about criminal justice reform. Across the United States, advances in DNA testing have prompted reviews of older convictions, improvements in evidence retention policies, and increased attention to investigative practices intended to strengthen the reliability of criminal prosecutions. While each case presents unique facts, the lessons drawn from the Wilson investigation continue to inform those efforts. For the Beatrice community, the murder of Helen Wilson remains a significant chapter in local history. It is remembered not only because of the crime itself, but because of the extraordinary legal and scientific developments that followed over the next 4 decades. The investigation serves as a reminder of the lasting impact that violent crime can have on victims' families, communities, and the institutions responsible for pursuing justice. Ultimately, the Helen Wilson case underscores several enduring principles. Objective forensic evidence can play a critical role in establishing the facts of a case. Investigative conclusions should be continually evaluated in light of credible new information. Scientific progress has the capacity to improve the accuracy of criminal investigations, even many years after a crime has occurred. And preserving evidence with care may allow future generations to answer questions that could not be resolved at the time of the original investigation. Today, the case continues to be studied because it represents more than a historical investigation. It reflects the evolution of forensic science, the importance of post-conviction review, and the ongoing effort to ensure that criminal justice systems remain both accurate and accountable. Although some questions surrounding the events of February 5, 1985, may never be answered with complete certainty, the evidence developed over the decades has profoundly reshaped the historical record. Helen Wilson's death remains a tragic loss. The subsequent investigation, its errors, and its later scientific reassessment continue to provide important lessons for law enforcement, forensic professionals, legal practitioners, and researchers. More than 40 years later, the case stands as a reminder that the pursuit of justice depends not only on determination, but also on the willingness to follow reliable evidence wherever it leads, and to reconsider past conclusions when that evidence demands it. With that, the historical record of the Helen Wilson case reaches its conclusion, a tragedy that profoundly affected a family and a community, and an investigation whose legacy continues to influence forensic science and the administration of justice across the United States. Long after newspaper headlines faded and court proceedings ended, the Helen Wilson case continued to influence conversations about criminal justice in the United States. Its legacy extends beyond a single investigation, serving as an example of how forensic science, legal review, and evidence preservation can reshape the understanding of a case decades after the crime occurred. One of the most enduring lessons concerns the preservation of evidence. The biological samples collected in 1985 were retained despite the limited forensic capabilities available at the time. Years later, advances in DNA technology transformed those preserved samples into the most significant evidence in the case. This experience reinforced the importance of maintaining evidence so that future scientific developments can be applied when appropriate. The investigation has also become part of discussions about post-conviction review. Legal systems seek finality through verdicts, but they also recognize that reliable new evidence may justify re-examining earlier conclusions. The Helen Wilson case illustrates how scientific advances can contribute to that process and why procedures exist to evaluate newly available evidence after convictions have become final. For forensic professionals, the case highlights the importance of objective analysis. Physical evidence, when properly collected, preserved, and interpreted, can provide information that remains available long after memories have faded. At the same time, the investigation demonstrates that forensic findings must always be considered within the broader factual context of a case. The case has likewise informed research into investigative practices. Scholars and practitioners have examined the circumstances surrounding the original investigation when discussing interview methods, corroboration of evidence, and safeguards designed to improve the reliability of criminal investigations. These discussions continue to influence professional training for investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and forensic scientists. For the Beatrice community, Helen Wilson's murder remains a significant historical event. The passage of time has not diminished its importance, but it has shifted attention toward the broader lessons the investigation provides. The case is remembered not only because of the crime itself, but because it demonstrates how justice systems can learn from experience and adapt as scientific knowledge advances. The broader significance of the investigation lies in its contribution to ongoing efforts to improve the accuracy of criminal justice. Advances in DNA analysis have led to the review of numerous historical cases, reinforcing the value of preserving evidence and maintaining procedures that allow credible new information to be considered when it emerges. Ultimately, the Helen Wilson case remains an important example of the relationship between science and justice. It illustrates that while no investigative process is immune from error, continued scientific progress and careful legal review can strengthen confidence in the pursuit of accurate outcomes. Its legacy endures not because every question was answered, but because the case demonstrated the importance of following reliable evidence, preserving the integrity of forensic work, and remaining willing to reassess conclusions when new facts become available. By the middle of the 20th century, countless homicide investigations had reached the same frustrating conclusion. Detectives had exhausted interviews, followed every available lead, compared fingerprints, examined crime scenes, and pursued every reasonable suspect. Yet many cases remained unresolved, not because investigators lacked determination, but because the scientific tools of the era had reached their limits. Biological evidence could often be collected, but its full value remained hidden. Blood typing could narrow possibilities. Hair and fiber comparisons could suggest connections. None of these methods, however, could uniquely identify an individual with the precision that modern forensic science would eventually provide. That changed dramatically with the emergence of DNA profiling. When British geneticist Sir Alec Jeffreys developed the first practical DNA profiling technique in 1984, few could have predicted how profoundly it would reshape criminal investigations. Within a matter of years, DNA analysis moved from an experimental scientific breakthrough to one of the most powerful forensic tools ever introduced into the justice system. For cold case investigators, it represented something entirely new: the ability to revisit evidence collected decades earlier and extract information that had been impossible to obtain when the crime first occurred. Unlike eyewitness testimony, DNA does not rely on memory. Unlike confessions, it is not influenced by questioning techniques. Unlike circumstantial evidence, it is based on biological characteristics inherited from birth. Every individual, except identical twins, possesses a unique genetic profile. This extraordinary level of discrimination allows forensic scientists to compare biological material recovered from a crime scene with reference samples and determine whether they originated from the same individual or exclude someone with a very high degree of confidence. The implications for cold cases were immediate and far-reaching. Across police evidence rooms, shelves held thousands of sealed envelopes, swabs, clothing items, fingernail scrapings, cigarette butts, drinking containers, hair samples, and other exhibits collected years earlier. Many had been preserved carefully despite the limited forensic methods available at the time. Investigators had often retained these materials in the hope that future scientific advances might reveal what contemporary technology could not. That hope proved justified. As DNA laboratories expanded their capabilities during the 1990s and early 2000s, evidence that had remained dormant for years suddenly became invaluable. Cases once considered permanently unsolved returned to active investigation. Detectives reopened files, reviewed crime scene documentation, and submitted preserved biological evidence for modern analysis. In many investigations, the most important witness was no longer a person, but a microscopic trace of biological material waiting to be examined. DNA transformed not only the ability to identify perpetrators, but also the ability to exclude innocent individuals. Before the development of forensic DNA profiling, investigators often relied heavily on witness statements, physical resemblance, opportunity, or circumstantial evidence. While these forms of evidence remain important, they can sometimes be incomplete or misleading. DNA introduced an independent scientific method capable of testing investigative theories against objective biological evidence. One of the most important developments accompanying DNA technology was the creation of national DNA databases. In the United States, the Combined DNA Index System, commonly known as CODIS, enabled forensic laboratories to compare crime scene DNA profiles against profiles obtained from convicted offenders and, were authorized by law, other qualifying sources. Rather than comparing one suspect at a time, investigators could search millions of genetic profiles electronically. This represented a fundamental change in investigative strategy. Instead of identifying a suspect first and testing evidence later, investigators could allow the evidence itself to generate investigative leads. A biological sample collected decades earlier might suddenly match an individual whose DNA had been entered into the database years after the original crime. Cases that had remained unsolved for generations could move forward because technology had eliminated limitations that once seemed insurmountable. Equally significant was DNA's role in correcting wrongful convictions. Since the late 20th century, post-conviction DNA testing has contributed to the exoneration of hundreds of individuals in the United States. Many have been convicted before modern DNA analysis became widely available. In these cases, preserved biological evidence provided an opportunity to re-evaluate earlier conclusions using scientific techniques unavailable during the original investigations. These exonerations prompted important legal reforms. Many jurisdictions expanded access to post-conviction DNA testing, strengthened evidence preservation requirements, and adopted procedures allowing older cases to be reviewed when reliable new scientific evidence emerged. Legislatures, courts, and law enforcement agencies increasingly recognized that justice depends not only on solving crimes, but also on ensuring that investigative conclusions remain consistent with the best available scientific evidence. Cold case units also evolved in response to these developments. Many police departments established specialized teams dedicated exclusively to reviewing unsolved homicides and violent crimes. These investigators combine traditional detective work with modern forensic analysis, revisiting witness statements, re-examining physical evidence, and applying technologies unavailable during the original investigations. Advances in digital record-keeping further support these efforts by allowing investigators to organize decades of case files and compare information across multiple investigations. The science itself has continued to improve. Modern DNA techniques require far smaller biological samples than earlier methods. Analysts can often generate usable DNA profiles from minute quantities of material that previously would have been considered insufficient for testing. Improvements in laboratory procedures have increased sensitivity while emphasizing rigorous quality assurance measures designed to minimize contamination and ensure reliable results. Another major development has been forensic genetic genealogy. Unlike traditional forensic DNA comparison, which relies on law enforcement databases, forensic genetic genealogy compares crime scene DNA with profiles voluntarily submitted to certain public genealogy services by individuals researching their family history. By identifying distant biological relatives, investigators can construct family trees and narrow the search for an unknown individual. This approach has contributed to the resolution of numerous previously unsolved cases, although its use is governed by evolving legal standards, privacy considerations, and agency policies. The emergence of forensic genetic genealogy demonstrates that DNA science continues to develop beyond the methods first introduced in the 1980s. What began as a tool for direct comparison between known samples has expanded into a sophisticated investigative resource capable of generating entirely new leads when no obvious suspect exists. Despite these remarkable capabilities, forensic experts consistently emphasize that DNA is one component of a comprehensive investigation rather than a substitute for traditional police work. DNA may establish that biological material from an individual is present at a particular location or on a particular object. It does not automatically explain how or when that material was deposited. Investigators must interpret DNA findings alongside crime scene reconstruction, witness interviews, digital evidence, documentary records, and all other relevant information. Scientific evidence provides powerful factual information, but determining the complete sequence of events still requires careful investigation. This balanced approach has become a defining characteristic of modern homicide investigations. Rather than relying exclusively on one form of evidence, investigators seek corroboration from multiple independent sources. DNA findings are evaluated together with surveillance footage, mobile phone records, financial transactions, forensic pathology, digital communications, and other available evidence. The goal is to build conclusions supported by multiple converging lines of inquiry. The influence of DNA extends beyond homicide investigations. Sexual assault cases, missing person investigations, unidentified human remains, disaster victim identification, and mass casualty events have all benefited from advances in forensic genetics. International cooperation between forensic laboratories has likewise expanded, enabling investigators to compare evidence across jurisdictions and, in some circumstances, across national borders. Education and professional standards have evolved alongside the science. Forensic analysts undergo specialized training in laboratory procedures, quality assurance, statistical interpretation, and courtroom testimony. Accreditation standards, proficiency testing, and peer review have become essential components of forensic laboratory practice. These safeguards help ensure that DNA evidence presented in court meets established scientific and legal standards. Public understanding of DNA has also changed considerably. Once viewed as a highly specialized scientific technique, DNA analysis is now widely recognized as one of the most influential developments in modern criminal investigation. Television programs, documentaries, and educational initiatives have introduced audiences to forensic genetics, although professionals often caution that real investigations typically proceed more slowly and involve more complex scientific analysis than fictional portrayals suggest. Looking ahead, forensic genetics continues to advance. Researchers are developing improved methods for analyzing degraded samples, separating mixed DNA profiles, and enhancing statistical interpretation. Emerging technologies may further increase the ability of investigators to recover useful information from evidence once considered unsuitable for examination. At the same time, legal and ethical discussions continue regarding privacy, database governance, and the responsible use of genetic information. Ultimately, the revolution brought about by DNA is not measured solely by the number of crimes solved. Its broader significance lies in strengthening the pursuit of accuracy. DNA has helped identify offenders, exclude innocent suspects, resolve decades-old mysteries, identify unknown victims, and provide families with answers that once seemed permanently out of reach. For every cold case reopened, every preserved evidence box examined, and every laboratory analysis completed, the underlying principle remains the same. Scientific progress offers new opportunities to evaluate the facts with greater precision than ever before. While no investigative method can answer every question, DNA has fundamentally transformed the landscape of criminal investigation, ensuring that even after many years have passed, the search for reliable evidence and for truth can continue. Imagine hearing someone calmly admit to a brutal crime. Most people instinctively reach the same conclusion. Why would an innocent person confess? For generations, courts, investigators, and the public treated confession evidence as the closest thing to absolute proof. A suspect could lie to avoid punishment. A witness could make a mistake. Physical evidence could be incomplete. But a confession, especially one that appeared detailed and voluntary, was widely considered almost impossible to fake. Modern psychological research has challenged that assumption. Over the past several decades, scientists have documented hundreds of cases in which innocent individuals admitted to crimes they did not commit. Some confessions were later disproved by DNA evidence. Others were contradicted by video recordings, newly discovered witnesses, or the identification of the actual offender. Together, these cases transformed the scientific understanding of human behavior under interrogation. Researchers generally distinguish three broad categories of false confessions. The first is the voluntary false confession. These occur without direct pressure from investigators. Although relatively uncommon, they can arise for many reasons. Some individuals seek attention or notoriety. Others experience mental illness that affects their perception of reality. In rare cases, a person may falsely confess to protect a family member or someone they believe to be vulnerable. The second category is the compliant false confession. Here, the individual privately knows they are innocent, but confesses because of external pressures. The goal is not necessarily to admit guilt, but to escape an intensely stressful situation. A suspect may believe that continuing to deny involvement is futile, that cooperation will allow them to go home, or that confessing is the quickest way to end an exhausting interrogation. The third category is known as the internalized false confession. This is the rarest and perhaps the most psychologically complex. Under certain circumstances, particularly when an individual is highly suggestible or cognitively vulnerable, repeated questioning and exposure to misleading information may lead a suspect to doubt their own memory. Over time, they may begin to believe they participated in events they cannot independently remember. These categories emerged from decades of psychological research rather than isolated observations. One of the central findings is that confession evidence cannot be evaluated simply by asking whether someone admitted guilt. Instead, investigators and courts must also examine how the confession was obtained, what information the suspect independently provided, and whether the statement is supported by objective evidence. Interrogation itself is a psychologically demanding experience. Most people have little understanding of what prolonged questioning feels like. An interview that lasts several hours can become physically and mentally exhausting. Fatigue affects concentration. Stress influences decision-making. Repeated accusations may gradually alter a person's perception of the situation, even if they know they are innocent. Psychologists have identified several factors that may increase vulnerability during interrogation. Young age is one. Adolescents often have less developed decision-making abilities than adults. They may be more likely to comply with authority figures or focus on immediate relief rather than long-term consequences. Intellectual disability or cognitive impairment can also increase vulnerability. Individuals with limited intellectual functioning may struggle to understand complex legal concepts, appreciate the significance of their statements, or recognize certain interrogation strategies. They may become eager to satisfy investigators by agreeing with suggestions rather than independently recalling events. Mental illness may present additional challenges in some cases. Certain psychiatric conditions can affect memory, perception, judgment, or communication. This does not mean that people with mental illness are inherently unreliable witnesses or suspects. Rather, investigators are encouraged to consider whether additional safeguards are appropriate when interviewing vulnerable individuals. Fatigue is another important factor. Research consistently demonstrates that sleep deprivation reduces attention, memory performance, and decision-making. Long interrogations conducted after extended periods without adequate rest may therefore increase the risk of inaccurate statements. Psychological research has also examined the role of suggestion. Human memory is not a perfect recording device. Instead, memory is reconstructive. People remember events by actively rebuilding them rather than replaying an exact mental recording. Under certain circumstances, exposure to misleading information may influence how memories are recalled or interpreted. This finding has implications beyond criminal investigations. Studies in cognitive psychology have demonstrated that memory can be affected by leading questions, repeated suggestions, and post-event information. For this reason, modern interviewing techniques increasingly emphasize open-ended questions that encourage witnesses and suspects to describe events in their own words. Another important concept is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias refers to the tendency to interpret new information in ways that support existing beliefs. Once investigators develop a theory about a case, they may, often unintentionally, place greater weight on evidence that appears consistent with that theory, while giving less attention to contradictory information. Professional training increasingly addresses this issue by encouraging investigators to actively seek evidence capable of disproving as well as supporting their working hypotheses. Courts have also become more aware of the limitations of confession evidence. Many jurisdictions now encourage or require electronic recording of custodial interrogations. Video recordings provide courts with a complete record of questioning, allowing judges and juries to evaluate not only what was said but also the context in which statements were made. Recording interviews offers benefits for everyone involved. Investigators obtain an accurate record of the interview. Suspects receive protection against inaccurate summaries. Courts gain direct access to the full exchange rather than relying solely on written reports or recollections. Scientific research has further emphasized the importance of corroboration. A confession should not stand alone if independent evidence can reasonably be obtained. Investigators seek objective facts that support or contradict statements made during questioning. These facts may include forensic evidence, surveillance footage, digital records, witness testimony, or other independently verifiable information. Professional organizations have incorporated many of these findings into investigative training. Modern interviewing approaches increasingly prioritize information gathering over confrontation. Rather than assuming guilt at the outset, investigators are encouraged to conduct structured interviews designed to obtain reliable information while minimizing the risk of contamination or suggestion. These developments reflect an important shift in philosophy. The objective of an interrogation is not simply to obtain a confession. The objective is to discover the truth. A truthful denial has investigative value. An accurate account from a witness has investigative value. A reliable confession supported by independent evidence has investigative value. The common goal is accuracy. It is equally important to recognize what psychological research does not say. The existence of false confessions does not mean that confessions are generally unreliable. Many criminal cases involve voluntary, accurate admissions fully supported by independent evidence. Rather, the research demonstrates that confessions, like all forms of evidence, should be evaluated carefully within the context of the complete investigation. Today, the psychology of false confessions is studied by investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, forensic psychologists, and legal scholars around the world. The field continues to evolve as researchers examine memory, decision-making, stress, communication, and investigative practices. Its central lesson is straightforward. Human behavior under pressure is often more complex than intuition suggests. Understanding that complexity does not weaken the pursuit of justice. Instead, it strengthens it by helping ensure that investigative conclusions are supported not only by admissions of guilt, but also by reliable, independently verifiable evidence. Some criminal cases become landmarks because investigators solve them quickly. Others become landmarks because they expose weaknesses in the justice system that were previously overlooked. The Helen Wilson investigation and the subsequent exoneration of the individuals known as the Beatrice Six belongs to the latter category. Its long-term significance extends beyond a single homicide investigation, influencing discussions about forensic science, interrogation practices, evidence preservation, and post-conviction review. The case is now frequently examined in legal education, forensic science programs, and criminal justice training as an example of why investigative conclusions must be continually evaluated against reliable evidence. One of the most important lessons concerns the relationship between confessions and independent corroboration. Historically, a confession often carried exceptional weight in criminal proceedings. While confessions remain important evidence, modern investigative practice emphasizes that they should be assessed alongside objective facts whenever possible. Investigators seek to determine whether key details in a confession are independently verified by physical evidence, forensic findings, witness testimony, or other reliable sources. This approach reflects a broader understanding that different forms of evidence serve different purposes. A confession may explain events from the perspective of the speaker, while forensic evidence provides independent scientific information. When both forms of evidence are consistent, confidence in investigative findings generally increases. When significant inconsistencies emerge, further examination may be warranted. The case also reinforced the importance of evidence preservation. Biological material collected during the original investigation remained available decades later, allowing forensic laboratories to apply DNA analysis that had not been possible when the crime occurred. Had that evidence not been preserved, later scientific testing could not have been performed. As a result, many jurisdictions have strengthened policies governing the retention of biological evidence in serious criminal cases. Although requirements vary, the underlying principle is consistent. Preserving evidence creates the possibility that future scientific advances may provide additional information. Another area of development has involved interview documentation. Many law enforcement agencies now routinely record custodial interviews in serious criminal investigations. Recording provides an objective record of the questions asked, the responses given, and the overall context of the interview. These recordings assist investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and courts in evaluating statements accurately. Comprehensive recording also promotes transparency. Rather than relying solely on written summaries prepared after an interview, participants in the legal process can review the interaction directly. Training for investigators has likewise evolved. Modern investigative education increasingly incorporates findings from psychology, communication research, and forensic science. Investigators receive instruction on interviewing techniques, memory, cognitive bias, evidence evaluation, and methods intended to maximize the reliability of information obtained during interviews. The emphasis is on gathering accurate information rather than confirming an initial theory. Professional organizations have also highlighted the importance of avoiding investigative bias. Investigators necessarily develop working hypotheses as cases progress. However, best practices encourage continual testing of those hypotheses against newly available evidence. This process includes considering alternative explanations, reassessing assumptions when new facts emerge, and ensuring that investigative conclusions remain supported by the complete evidentiary record. The Wilson case has been discussed in this context because it illustrates how scientific developments may require investigators and courts to revisit conclusions reached years earlier. Forensic science itself has undergone substantial transformation. DNA analysis is now integrated into homicide investigations at an early stage whenever biological evidence is available. Advances in laboratory methods have increased sensitivity, improved quality assurance procedures, and expanded the ability to analyze degraded or limited samples. In addition to DNA, improvements in digital forensics, fingerprint analysis, crime scene documentation, and forensic pathology have broadened the range of scientific tools available to investigators. Post-conviction review has become another important component of criminal justice reform. Many jurisdictions have established procedures allowing individuals to request DNA testing under specified circumstances when biological evidence remains available. These procedures recognize that technological advances may produce reliable information unavailable during earlier legal proceedings. Courts evaluating such requests consider statutory requirements, the availability of evidence, and the potential significance of the proposed testing. While not every request results in new findings, the existence of these procedures reflects an institutional commitment to accuracy. The Wilson investigation also contributed to broader public awareness of wrongful convictions. Public understanding of these issues has expanded through academic research, court decisions, investigative journalism, and educational initiatives. Discussions often focus on the importance of evidence-based decision-making, rigorous forensic standards, and safeguards designed to improve the reliability of criminal investigations. Importantly, the lessons drawn from the case are not directed at a single profession or institution. Investigators operate under significant pressure to solve serious crimes. Forensic scientists work within the scientific methods and technologies available at a given time. Prosecutors evaluate evidence presented during investigations. Defense attorneys test that evidence through the adversarial process. Judges oversee legal proceedings. Juries assess the evidence presented in court. The criminal justice system functions through the interaction of all these participants. Cases such as the Helen Wilson investigation demonstrate why continual learning and procedural improvement remain essential across every stage of that process. Today, the influence of the case can be seen in ongoing efforts to improve investigative practices through research, technology, professional training, and evidence-based policy development. While no system can eliminate every possibility of error, the experience has reinforced the importance of preserving evidence, applying reliable scientific methods, documenting investigative procedures, and remaining willing to reassess conclusions when credible new information becomes available. The legacy of the Helen Wilson investigation is therefore measured not only by what was learned about one homicide, but also by how those lessons have informed broader efforts to strengthen the accuracy, transparency, and fairness of criminal investigations. More than 4 decades after the crime, the case continues to remind legal and forensic professionals that justice depends on a continuing commitment to objective evidence, scientific integrity, and careful review of the facts. Every homicide investigation begins with uncertainty. Investigators arrive at a crime scene with incomplete information, limited time, and the responsibility to reconstruct events that no one witnessed in their entirety. Every decision made during those first hours, how evidence is collected, how witnesses are interviewed, how investigative theories are developed, can influence the course of a case for years to come. The Helen Wilson investigation has become one of the cases frequently discussed in law enforcement training because it illustrates both the challenges investigators face and the importance of continually evaluating evidence as new information becomes available. One of the first lessons concerns the crime scene itself. Modern investigators are trained to view every crime scene as a source of information that may continue to yield evidence long after the initial investigation ends. Biological material, fingerprints, trace evidence, footwear impressions, digital devices, and countless other forms of physical evidence may acquire greater significance as forensic science advances. For that reason, meticulous documentation is essential. Crime scene photographs, sketches, measurements, written observations, and chain-of-custody records ensure that future investigators can understand exactly how evidence was discovered and preserved. Even details that appear insignificant during the initial investigation may later become important when new technologies emerge. Evidence preservation is equally critical. In serious criminal cases, many agencies now maintain biological evidence for extended periods because future scientific developments may provide opportunities for additional testing. The history of forensic science demonstrates that analytical capabilities continue to improve over time. Another lesson involves investigative flexibility. Experienced detectives understand that an early theory is only a working hypothesis. As additional evidence becomes available, that hypothesis must be tested rather than protected. If new information contradicts earlier assumptions, investigators are expected to reassess their conclusions objectively. This principle reflects an important distinction between investigation and advocacy. The purpose of an investigation is to determine what happened based on the available evidence, not to defend an existing theory regardless of new facts. Modern investigative training, therefore, encourages detectives to actively consider alternative explanations throughout an investigation. This approach helps reduce the influence of confirmation bias, the natural human tendency to give greater weight to information that supports existing beliefs while overlooking contradictory evidence. Interviewing practices have also evolved. Contemporary investigative interviewing increasingly emphasizes obtaining accurate and complete information through structured, professional questioning. Interviewers are trained to distinguish between information volunteered independently and information that may result from suggestion or misunderstanding. Recording interviews has become another important safeguard. Electronic recordings preserve the complete interaction, allowing investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and courts to review both the questions asked and the answers provided. Recordings help ensure that statements are evaluated within their full context rather than relying solely on written summaries. Technology has transformed nearly every aspect of homicide investigations. Digital evidence now plays a central role in many cases. Mobile phones, surveillance systems, vehicle data, social media records, financial transactions, and location information frequently supplement traditional forensic evidence. Modern detectives therefore work alongside specialists in digital forensics, forensic biology, fingerprint analysis, crime scene reconstruction, forensic pathology, and numerous other disciplines. Complex investigations have become increasingly multidisciplinary. Rather than relying on a single investigator's experience, major cases often involve coordinated teams with specialized expertise. This collaborative approach allows evidence to be evaluated from multiple professional perspectives. Cold case investigations have also changed significantly. Many law enforcement agencies maintain dedicated cold case units responsible for reviewing unsolved homicides using contemporary forensic methods. These investigators revisit older evidence, identify opportunities for new laboratory testing, re-examine witness statements, and compare historical investigations with information developed in later cases. Advances in DNA analysis have made this work especially valuable. Evidence collected decades earlier may now produce results that were impossible when the crime occurred. As laboratory methods continue to improve, investigators remain aware that future developments may provide additional opportunities to examine preserved evidence. Professional education remains an essential component of modern policing. Investigators regularly receive continuing training in forensic science, interview techniques, legal developments, ethics, and investigative decision-making. Criminal investigations continue to evolve alongside scientific research, judicial decisions, and technological innovation. Another important lesson concerns communication. Major investigations often generate intense public interest. Modern law enforcement agencies seek to balance transparency with the need to protect investigative integrity. Information released publicly must be accurate, supported by evidence, and carefully evaluated to avoid compromising ongoing inquiries. Documentation has likewise become increasingly comprehensive. Every significant investigative step is recorded, allowing supervisors, prosecutors, courts, and, where appropriate, future investigators to understand how decisions were made. Thorough documentation strengthens accountability and facilitates later review if questions arise. The Helen Wilson investigation is frequently referenced, not because it represents every homicide investigation, but because it illustrates the importance of continuous learning. Criminal justice is not static. Scientific knowledge expands. Investigative methods improve. Legal standards evolve. Each generation of investigators benefits from the experience accumulated by those who came before. Perhaps the most enduring lesson is humility. Even experienced investigators recognize that early conclusions may change as new evidence emerges. Maintaining an open, evidence-based approach allows investigations to adapt when scientific advances or newly discovered information alter the factual picture. Today, homicide investigators have access to technologies that were unimaginable in 1985. Yet the fundamental objective remains unchanged: to gather reliable evidence, evaluate it objectively, and reconstruct events as accurately as possible. The Helen Wilson investigation continues to be studied because it reminds professionals that every investigation carries lasting consequences. Careful evidence collection, scientific integrity, comprehensive documentation, and a willingness to reconsider assumptions are not simply procedural ideals. They are practical safeguards that strengthen the pursuit of justice. More than 4 decades after the crime, the case remains an important educational example. Its legacy is reflected not only in the advances of forensic science, but also in the continuing commitment of investigators to learn from the past, apply the best available evidence, and improve the accuracy of criminal investigations for the future.